The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Eleanor Sutton stepped onto the wooden platform of Sloan, Nevada. Her leather satchel gripped tightly in both hands, and realized with a sinking feeling that not a single person waiting to greet her could read the sign she held with the name of the town carefully printed across it. It was August of 1882, and the desert heat pressed down on everything like a heavy blanket, making the air shimmer above the packed dirt roads. The small crowd that had gathered stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and confusion, their weathered faces squinting against the afternoon sun. A portly man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped forward, tipping his hat. "You must be the new schoolteacher. I'm Sheriff Davidson. Welcome to Sloan." Eleanor managed a smile despite her exhaustion from 3 days of travel. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'm Eleanor Sutton from Boston." "I'm very pleased to be here." "Boston, you say?" The sheriff whistled low. "That's quite a journey. Come on, I'll show you to the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's got a roof and 4 walls, which is more than some places around here can claim." As they walked through the town, Eleanor took in her surroundings with growing apprehension. Sloan was smaller than she had imagined, consisting of perhaps 24 buildings clustered along a single main street. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith shop, and various other establishments lined the dusty thoroughfare. Men in worn hats and dusty clothes watched her pass with undisguised interest. Women peered from doorways, their faces lined from sun and hard living. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple structure of weathered wood with windows that someone had clearly tried to clean recently, though desert dust had already begun to reclaim them. Inside, rough-hewn benches served as desks, and a battered chalkboard leaned against the front wall. Eleanor set down her satchel and turned to face the sheriff. "When do the children typically arrive for lessons?" she asked, trying to keep the uncertainty from her voice. Sheriff Davidson scratched his chin. "Well, Miss Sutton, that's something we should probably discuss. See, most folks around here never had much use for reading and writing. They work the mines, tend cattle, that sort of thing. The town council pooled money for a teacher because they figured it was something a proper town ought to have. But truth be told, I'm not sure how many students you'll get." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. She had left everything behind in Boston, her family's disapproval, her comfortable life, a potential marriage to a man she didn't love, all for this opportunity to make a real difference. Surely the parents want their children educated. "Want and need are different things out here, madam. Most kids work alongside their folks soon as they're able. But don't you worry. I'll spread the word that school starts Monday morning. We'll see who shows up." After the sheriff left, Eleanor spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the schoolhouse and arranging her meager supplies. She had brought primers, slates, chalk, and books from Boston, convinced that education could transform lives. Now, standing alone in the empty room as the sun began to set, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Her lodgings were in a small room behind the general store, courtesy of Mrs. Patterson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who seemed to take pity on the young teacher. That evening, over a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Mrs. Patterson confirmed Eleanor's fears. "Most folks here can't read a lick," she said matter-of-factly. "My husband keeps the store accounts with tallies and marks. We get by well enough. But I think it's wonderful you're here, dear. My own mother could read, taught me some before she passed. There's power in words, power in knowing what's written down. Maybe the young ones will see that." Monday morning arrived with relentless sunshine and temperatures that were already climbing by 9 o'clock. Eleanor stood at the schoolhouse door in her best dress, her dark hair pinned carefully beneath a modest hat, and watched the road for students. By 10 o'clock, 3 children had appeared, shepherded by a tired-looking mother who left them without a word. By noon, 2 more had wandered in, drawn more by curiosity than parental instruction. Eleanor began with the basics, showing them letters and sounds, trying to assess what they already knew, which was virtually nothing. The children were restless in the heat, unaccustomed to sitting still, and by mid-afternoon she dismissed them, exhausted and discouraged. Tuesday brought 4 students. Wednesday brought 6. By Friday, Eleanor had 9 children of varying ages, from a tiny girl of perhaps 5 to a gangly boy who looked to be 13 or 14. It was progress, but hardly the thriving school she had envisioned. She was cleaning the chalkboard that Friday afternoon, preparing for the weekend, when she heard boots on the wooden floor behind her. Turning, she found a man standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright desert light. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face that was young but weathered, with sharp features and striking gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice low and slightly hesitant. "I heard there's someone in town teaching reading and writing." Eleanor set down her rag, studying this unexpected visitor. He was perhaps 25 or 26, dressed in worn denim and a faded shirt, with a leather vest and the unmistakable bearing of someone who spent his days in the saddle. A cowboy, clearly, working one of the nearby ranches. "Yes, I'm Miss Sutton, the schoolteacher. Are you interested in lessons for a child?" He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "No, madam, for myself. I know it's probably unusual, a grown man asking about school, but I never learned my letters. Been meaning to for years, and now that there's someone here who can teach, well, I figured I'd ask." Something in his earnest expression touched Eleanor deeply. Here, finally, was someone who understood the value of what she had to offer. "It's not unusual at all. In fact, I think it's admirable." "What's your name?" "Mason Morris, madam. Folks call me Mason. I work at the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles west of town." "Well, Mr. Morris, I'd be happy to teach you. The children come in the mornings. Perhaps you could come in the afternoons when you're finished with your work." Relief flooded his face. "That would be just fine, madam. I can be here tomorrow afternoon if that suits. Tomorrow is Saturday. Shall we say Monday afternoon around 4 o'clock? Yes, madam, I'll be here, thank you." He started to leave, then turned back. "How much do you charge for lessons?" Eleanor hadn't even thought about payment for adult students. "We can discuss that later, Mr. Morris. Let's see how the first lesson goes." After he left, Eleanor found herself smiling for the first time since arriving in Sloan. One student, one adult who wanted to learn, felt like a small victory. That weekend, Eleanor explored the town more thoroughly, introducing herself to residents and encouraging them to send their children to school. Most were polite but non-committal. Sunday, she attended the small church service, where a circuit preacher delivered a sermon to perhaps 20 people. The faithful were few in Sloan, it seemed, and those who came were more interested in the social aspects than spiritual guidance. Monday afternoon, Eleanor waited nervously for Mason Morris to arrive. At precisely 4 o'clock, she heard his boots on the steps, and he appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. "Come in, Mr. Morris. Please sit." She gestured to one of the larger benches near the front. He sat carefully, placing his hat beside him, his large hands resting on his knees. Up close, in better light, Eleanor could see he was quite handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and those remarkable gray eyes. There was something gentle in his manner despite his obvious strength, a careful politeness that suggested good upbringing. "Have you ever learned any letters at all?" Eleanor asked, pulling up a chair beside him. "No, madam. My folks died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week. I was 8 years old went to work on a ranch soon after. Never had time for schooling, and there wasn't anyone around to teach me anyway. I'm sorry about your parents, Eleanor said softly. That must have been terribly difficult. It was a long time ago, Mason said, though something in his eyes suggested the pain was still there, buried but not forgotten. But that's why I want to learn now. A man ought to be able to read a contract before he signs it, ought to be able to write his own name proper like. I've gotten by with an X all these years, but I want more than that. Eleanor felt a surge of determination. Then we'll make sure you get it. Let's start with the alphabet. She moved to the chalkboard and began writing letters, saying each one aloud. Mason watched intently, his focus absolute. She could see him mouthing the letters, trying to commit them to memory. When she handed him a slate and chalk to practice, his large hands struggled to form the shapes, but he persisted with patient determination. They worked for nearly 2 hours, until the light began to fade and Eleanor's voice grew hoarse from repeating letters and sounds. Mason absorbed everything like parched earth soaking up rain, asking questions, practicing over and over until he could reliably identify the first few letters of the alphabet. That's excellent progress for a first lesson, Eleanor said as they prepared to leave. If you practice these letters over the week, we can continue next Monday. Mason looked disappointed. Only once a week. Well, I thought with your work at the ranch I can be here every afternoon, madam, if you're willing to teach me. I'll work extra hours in the morning to make up for it. This is important to me. Eleanor was surprised by his intensity. Every afternoon, that's quite a commitment, Mr. Morris. I've wasted enough years already, Miss Sutton. I don't want to waste any more. How could she refuse such dedication? Very well. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock. Thank you, madam. You won't regret this. He put on his hat and headed for the door, then paused. Miss Sutton, why did you come to a place like Sloane? A lady like you, educated and refined, you could have taught anywhere. Eleanor considered the question carefully. Because I wanted to go somewhere I could make a real difference. In Boston, there are plenty of teachers. Here I'm needed. Mason nodded slowly. Well, I'm mighty glad you came. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden steps. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Mornings, Eleanor taught the children, whose numbers slowly grew as word spread and more parents decided to give the school a chance. By mid-September, she had 15 regular students, ranging from 5 to 14 years old. The work was challenging, with children at different levels all needing attention, but Eleanor found it deeply rewarding to see their progress. But the afternoons belonged to Mason Morris, and those hours became the highlight of Eleanor's days. He arrived every afternoon without fail, often dusty and tired from a long day's work, but always eager to learn. His progress was remarkable. Within 3 weeks, he had mastered the entire alphabet and was beginning to sound out simple words. Within 6 weeks, he could read basic sentences. What struck Eleanor most was not just his aptitude, but his genuine love for learning. Every new word he conquered brought a flash of joy to his eyes. Every sentence he read successfully was a small victory that he savored. He asked endless questions about words, their meanings, their origins, and Eleanor found herself preparing for their lessons as carefully as a professor might prepare a university lecture. They talked during those afternoon sessions, conversations drifting beyond letters and words to life and experiences. Eleanor learned that Mason had worked ranches across Nevada and California, that he was known as one of the best horsemen in the territory, that he sent most of his wages to support an elderly aunt in Sacramento, who had taken him in briefly after his parents died. He learned that Eleanor had shocked her wealthy Boston family by refusing a marriage proposal from a prominent banker's son. that she had always dreamed of adventure beyond the confines of society drawing rooms, that she believed education was the key to opportunity and freedom. Eleanor found herself watching for him each afternoon, listening for the sound of his horse approaching the schoolhouse. She told herself it was simply because he was such a dedicated student, but in quiet moments, she admitted there was more to it than that. Mason Morris was unlike any man she had ever known. He was genuine in a way Boston society men were not, honest and straightforward, with no pretense or games. When he looked at her with those gray eyes, she felt seen in a way she never had before. For his part, Mason found himself thinking about Eleanor Sutton at all hours of the day. While riding fence lines or moving cattle, his mind would drift to their afternoon lessons, to the sound of her voice patiently explaining a new concept, to the way her face lit up when he successfully read a difficult passage. She was beautiful, certainly, with her dark hair and expressive brown eyes, but it was more than that. She was kind and patient, brilliant and passionate about her work, and she treated him with a respect he rarely received from others. She never made him feel stupid for not knowing things, never talked down to him. Instead, she seemed genuinely delighted by his progress and interested in his thoughts and opinions. The other ranch hands noticed the change in him. He had always been somewhat quiet and solitary, but now he seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When they teased him about his daily rides into town, he brushed off their comments, but he couldn't deny the truth to himself. He was falling in love with his teacher. October brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn to the high desert. Eleanor had been in Sloan for 2 months, and the school was now an established part of the community. She had 23 students in the morning sessions, and several of the mothers had begun lingering after dropping off their children, asking Eleanor questions about reading and writing. She had started an informal evening class for women twice a week, teaching basic literacy in the schoolhouse by lamplight. Mason's progress continued to astound her. He was now reading at a level comparable to her older students, devouring every book she could provide. He had worked through her primers and simple readers, and was now tackling more complex texts. One afternoon in mid-October, she handed him a worn copy of poems by Walt Whitman. "I thought you might enjoy this," she said. "Poetry can be challenging, but it's also beautiful. It shows what language can really do." Mason opened the book carefully, running his fingers over the pages with reverence. "I never imagined I'd be able to read something like this." "Read this one," Eleanor said, pointing to a particular poem. "Out loud, if you don't mind." Mason cleared his throat and began to read, slowly but clearly, his deep voice giving weight to the words. Eleanor watched him, seeing the concentration on his face, the way he paused to appreciate a particularly striking phrase. When he finished, he looked up at her with wonder in his eyes. "That's something, isn't it? The way the words paint pictures in your mind. That's exactly what good writing does," Eleanor said, pleased by his insight. "You have a natural feel for language, Mason. You should be proud of how far you've come." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing. It's like you've opened up a whole new world." The intensity in his gaze made Eleanor's heart race. They were sitting close together, as they always did during lessons, but suddenly she was acutely aware of his nearness, of the strength in his hands as he held the book, of the warmth radiating from him in the cooling afternoon air. "I'm glad I could help," she managed, her voice not quite steady. "You've been a wonderful student." "Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, the schoolhouse door burst open and Sheriff Davidson rushed in, his face grim. "Miss Sutton, Mason," Glad I found you both. There's trouble. The Henderson ranch was hit by rustlers last night. They took 30 head of cattle and shot Bill Henderson when he tried to stop them. He's alive, but it's bad. We're putting together a posse to go after them. Mason was on his feet instantly. I'll ride with you. Figured you would. We're meeting at my office in an hour. Bring provisions for a few days. After the sheriff left, Mason turned back to Eleanor, clearly torn. I'm sorry, I have to go. Of course you do, Eleanor said, fear clutching at her chest. But please be careful. I will. He hesitated, then took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. What I was going to say, it'll keep. But when I get back, we need to talk. I'll be here, Eleanor promised, squeezing his hand. Come back safely. He held her gaze for a long moment, then released her hand and left, his boots quick on the steps as he hurried to prepare for the hunt. Eleanor stood alone in the schoolhouse, staring at the copy of Whitman's poems lying open on the bench, and realized with perfect clarity that she had fallen in love with Mason Morris. The thought should have alarmed her. He was a cowboy with little education and no prospects beyond ranch work. She was a trained teacher from a wealthy family. They came from completely different worlds, but none of that seemed to matter. What mattered was the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the way his presence made her feel alive and hopeful, the way he looked at her as though she were the most remarkable person he had ever met. And now he was riding into danger, chasing armed criminals across the harsh desert landscape. The next 3 days were agony for Eleanor. She taught her classes mechanically, her mind constantly wandering to Mason and the posse. Mrs. Patterson tried to reassure her, explaining that the men were experienced and well-armed, but Eleanor couldn't shake her worry. She had only just realized the depth of her feelings. The thought that Mason might be hurt or killed before she could tell him was unbearable. On the 3rd evening, Eleanor was preparing for her women's literacy class when she heard horses approaching. She rushed to the window and saw the posse riding back into town, dusty and exhausted. Her eyes scanned the group frantically until she spotted Mason, alive and apparently unharmed, riding near the middle of the group. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she had to grip the windowsill for support. He was safe. He had come back. She forced herself to conduct the evening class with some semblance of normalcy, though her students must have noticed her distraction. When the lesson finally ended and the women departed, Eleanor began tidying up, trying to decide whether she should seek Mason out or wait for him to come to her. The decision was made for her when she heard familiar footsteps on the porch. Mason appeared in the doorway, looking worn and tired but whole. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the room. Then Mason moved forward, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. I couldn't wait until tomorrow, he said. I had to see you tonight. Did you catch them, the rustlers? Eleanor asked, though it seemed trivial compared to what she really wanted to say. We did. They'll face justice. Bill Henderson is going to recover. Mason paused, seeming to gather his courage. Eleanor, these past 3 days, riding through the desert, sleeping on hard ground, tracking dangerous men, the only thing that kept me going was thinking about you, about getting back here to you. Eleanor's breath caught. Mason, please, let me say this before I lose my nerve. I know I'm not what you deserve. I'm just a ranch hand who couldn't even read until 2 months ago. You're educated and refined from a good family back east. But I love you, Eleanor. I've been in love with you for weeks now, and I can't keep it inside anymore. I understand if you don't feel the same way. I understand if the idea of being with someone like me is— Stop, Eleanor interrupted, stepping closer to him. Just stop. You're wrong about so many things. You're not just anything, Mason Morris. You're one of the most remarkable men I've ever met. You're kind and honest and dedicated. You have a beautiful mind and a good heart, and I've been falling in love with you too." The hope that flooded Mason's face was almost painful to see. "Truly." "Truly," Eleanor confirmed, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of several days' beard growth. "I was terrified when you left. I kept thinking about all the things I wished I'd told you." Mason caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere, not if you want me to stay." "I want you to stay," Eleanor whispered. "I want that very much." He drew her into his arms, holding her gently as though she might break. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, simply holding each other, savoring the relief of his safe return and the joy of acknowledged feelings. Finally, Mason pulled back just enough to look down at her. "Can I kiss you?" In answer, Eleanor rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet at first, tentative exploration, but it quickly deepened as weeks of suppressed feelings found expression. Mason's arms tightened around her, and Eleanor felt as though she were falling and being caught at the same time, dizzy with emotion and desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said quietly. "I want to court you properly, let the whole town see that my intentions are honorable." "The whole town?" Eleanor asked, touched by his concern for her reputation. "You're not worried what people will say. Let them say whatever they want. I'm proud to love you, Eleanor Sutton, and I want everyone to know it." Over the following weeks, Mason made good on his promise. He courted Eleanor with old-fashioned determination, calling on her at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house in the evenings, escorting her to church on Sundays, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers from the open range and smooth stones he'd found by the creek. The town watched this developing romance with great interest, though reactions were mixed. Some thought it sweet that the teacher and the cowboy had found each other. Others whispered that Eleanor was throwing herself away on a man with no future. Eleanor ignored the gossip. She had never been happier. Mason continued his afternoon lessons, though now they often ended with stolen kisses and whispered endearments. His reading ability had progressed to the point where he could tackle nearly anything, and Eleanor loved watching him discover new authors and ideas. He had borrowed a small blank book from the general store and had started writing his own thoughts and observations, showing them shyly to Eleanor and asking for her feedback. In early November, Mason asked Eleanor to accompany him on a ride out to the Double Creek Ranch on a Sunday afternoon. She borrowed a horse from the livery and a riding outfit from Mrs. Patterson's daughter, and they rode out together into the desert under a clear blue sky. The ranch was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Tom Crawford, greeted them warmly, clearly fond of Mason. "So this is the teacher everyone's been talking about," Crawford said, shaking Eleanor's hand. "Mason here hasn't shut up about you for months." Getting so a man can't have a conversation with him that doesn't somehow circle back to Miss Sutton and her wonderful teaching methods. Mason flushed, but Eleanor laughed, charmed by his embarrassment. "I hope he's been at least somewhat focused on his work." "Best hand I've got," Crawford said seriously. "Been with me 5 years now, and I'd be lost without him, which is actually something I wanted to discuss with both of you." He led them into his house, a comfortable if rustic dwelling, and offered them coffee. Once they were settled, Crawford leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest. "Mason, you've been dropping hints about possibly moving on come spring. Now I understand a man wants to settle down when he finds the right woman, but I've got a proposition for you." What if you didn't have to choose between ranch work and being near town? What do you mean? Mason asked. I'm getting older and this place is getting to be too much for me. My sons have no interest in ranching. Both went off to San Francisco to make their fortunes. I've been thinking about taking on a partner, someone who knows the business and can eventually take over when I'm ready to retire. I'm offering you that partnership, Mason. We'd work out the details, but it would mean a share of the profits, a house of your own on the property, and a real future instead of just wages. Eleanor saw the shock and hope war on Mason's face. Mr. Crawford, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous. It's not generosity, it's good business. You've earned this, son. Think it over and let me know. The offer stands. He turned to Eleanor. And Miss Sutton, I hope you'll forgive an old man for being presumptuous, but there's a little house on the east side of the property near the creek. It's been empty for years, but it could be fixed up nice. Might make a good home for a schoolteacher and her husband if they were so inclined. Close enough to town for her to keep teaching, but with land around them and a good life. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the man's kindness. That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Crawford. You've done good things for this town, miss. Folks are learning, kids are getting educated, and you've helped this stubborn cowboy here finally learn his letters. That's worth supporting. On the ride back to town, Mason was quiet, clearly thinking hard. Finally, as they paused on a rise overlooking Sloan in the fading light, he turned to Eleanor. If I accept Crawford's offer, if I become a partner in the ranch, I could give you a real life. Not a fancy one, not like what you left behind in Boston, but a good one. A home, security, a future. Eleanor Sutton, will you marry me? Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. They had known each other for less than 3 months, and yet she had never been more certain of anything. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Mason pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that made her forget they were sitting on horses in broad view of anyone who might ride past. When they finally broke apart, both laughing breathlessly, he said, I don't have a ring yet, but I'll get you one, the best one I can afford. I don't need a fancy ring, Eleanor said. I just need you. You have me, Mason promised. For the rest of my life you have me. They announced their engagement the following Sunday at church, and the response was enthusiastic. Even those who had been skeptical of the relationship seemed caught up in the romance of it all. Mrs. Patterson immediately began planning the wedding, recruiting other women to help with preparations. Sheriff Davidson offered to give Eleanor away, since her own father was far away in Boston and unlikely to make the journey. Eleanor wrote to her family, explaining her decision to marry Mason. The response, when it came weeks later, was predictably disapproving. Her father wrote that she was throwing away her education and breeding on a nobody. Her mother begged her to reconsider and return home. Her younger sister sent a brief note wishing her happiness, but expressing confusion at her choices. Eleanor read the letters once, then set them aside. She had chosen her own path, and she would not look back. The wedding was planned for mid-December, giving them time to prepare and for Mason to accept Crawford's partnership offer and begin transitioning to his new role. Mason spent his spare time fixing up the little house by the creek, working late into the evenings to repair the roof, replace broken windows, and make it livable. Eleanor helped when she could, painting walls and sewing curtains, turning the neglected building into a home. The afternoon lessons continued, though now they spent as much time talking about their future as they did on reading and writing. Mason wanted to know everything about Eleanor's vision for their life together. How many children did she want? What kind of furniture should they get for the house? Should they plant a garden come spring? I want at least 3 children, Eleanor said one afternoon as they painted the bedroom. Maybe 4. I want a house full of noise and laughter." "I want that too," Mason agreed, "though I'll confess the idea of being a father scares me half to death." "What if I don't know how to do it right? You'll be wonderful," Eleanor assured him. "You're patient and kind and good. That's what children need most." "I want to teach them to read," Mason said quietly. "I want them to have what I didn't: education, opportunities, choices. And I want them to know how lucky they are to have you as their mother." Eleanor set down her paintbrush and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "We're going to have a good life, Mason. I can feel it." He held her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I never thought I could be this happy. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Eleanor said firmly. "This is real. We're real." December arrived with cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the desert briefly green. Eleanor's school was thriving, with 32 students now attending regularly. Several of the older students, inspired by Mason's example, had started staying after the children's lessons to improve their own reading and writing skills. The evening women's literacy class had grown to include 15 regular attendees. Education was transforming Sloan in small but significant ways. The general store now posted prices in addition to telling them verbally. The saloon had started offering written menus. People who had spent their entire lives making marks instead of signatures were learning to write their names. Eleanor watched these changes with deep satisfaction, knowing she was making the difference she had dreamed of. On December 15th, 1882, Eleanor Sutton married Mason Morris in the little church in Sloan, Nevada. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other women had helped her make, with lace salvaged from an old tablecloth and pearl buttons that someone's grandmother had brought from the East 50 years before. Mason wore new clothes purchased from the general store, and he had gotten his hair cut and his beard neatly trimmed. He looked handsome and nervous, and so full of love that Eleanor's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw him waiting at the altar. Sheriff Davidson walked her down the short aisle, patting her hand kindly when it trembled on his arm. The church was packed with townspeople, all of whom seemed genuinely happy for the couple. Even some of the ranch hands from Double Creek had ridden in for the ceremony, including Tom Crawford, who sat in the front row beaming like a proud father. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, his words about love and commitment and partnership resonating through the small space. When Mason took Eleanor's hands in his to recite his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "Eleanor, I promise to love you and cherish you for all my days. I promise to work hard to give you a good life, to support your dreams, to be faithful and true. You've given me so much already, more than I ever dared hope for. I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Eleanor's voice shook as she replied, "Mason, I promise to love you and stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build a life with you, to fill our home with love and laughter. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued. I promise to treasure that gift every day of my life." The ring Mason slipped onto her finger was simple silver with a small turquoise stone, exactly perfect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Mason kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held in the saloon, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was food brought by the townswomen, music from a fiddle player, and dancing that went on late into the evening. Eleanor danced with Mason, with Sheriff Davidson, with Tom Crawford, with some of her students' fathers, but she kept coming back to her husband, drawn to him like a compass needle to north. As the party continued around them, Mason pulled Eleanor outside into the cool night air. The stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky, so bright and numerous that they cast faint shadows. "Are you happy?" Mason asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Eleanor leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. I keep thinking about the day you arrived in Sloane. If I hadn't gotten up the courage to ask about lessons, if I'd let my pride keep me from admitting I couldn't read, we might never have met like this. But you did ask," Eleanor pointed out. "You were brave and honest and willing to admit you needed help. That's one of the things I love most about you." "I love you," Mason said simply. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for choosing me back," Eleanor replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. "Now take me home, husband." To our home. They rode out to the ranch together in a wagon borrowed from the general store, their few possessions packed in the back. The little house by the creek was dark when they arrived, but Mason had laid a fire ready to light, and soon the main room was glowing with warmth. They had simple furniture, most of it made by Mason himself or purchased second-hand, but to Eleanor it was perfect. That night, in the bedroom they had painted together, Eleanor and Mason consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, discovering each other with gentle wonder. Later, lying in his arms in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of the creek, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known before. This was where she belonged. Not in Boston drawing rooms, but here, in this rough little house in the Nevada desert, with this remarkable man who had captured her heart. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and joy. Eleanor continued teaching, riding into town each morning and returning each afternoon. Mason threw himself into his new role as ranch partner, working closely with Tom Crawford to learn the business side of ranching in addition to the practical work he already knew so well. In the evenings, they came together in their little house, sharing meals and conversation, reading aloud to each other, making plans for the future. Winter deepened, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the desert and mountains. Eleanor discovered she loved ranch life, the quiet beauty of the landscape, the sense of space and freedom, the simple routines that marked each day. She helped Mason with ranch accounts, teaching him the mathematics he needed to manage finances. He taught her to ride better, to read the signs of changing weather, to appreciate the subtle beauties of the desert. In late January, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was 23 years old, far from her own mother, about to bring a child into this harsh and beautiful world. When she told Mason, he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around with a whoop of delight that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy, Eleanor, I'm more than happy, I'm awestruck. We're going to be parents." He set her down carefully, suddenly anxious. "Are you feeling well? Should you be riding to town? Maybe you should stop teaching and rest." Eleanor laughed at his protectiveness. "Women have babies all the time while continuing their normal activities. I'm perfectly healthy. I'll keep teaching as long as I'm able." True to her word, Eleanor continued her school routine through the winter and into spring. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness made the early weeks challenging. Her students were fascinated by the gradual changes in her appearance, the older girls especially excited about the coming baby. The women in her evening literacy class offered endless advice about childbirth and infant care, some helpful, some contradictory, all well-meaning. Mason was an attentive husband, almost comically worried about Eleanor's well-being. He built a cradle in his spare time, sanding it smooth and carving decorations into the wood. Tom Crawford's wife, who lived in town but visited the ranch regularly, gave them baby clothes her own sons had worn decades before. The community rallied around them, supporting the young couple in practical ways. In early May, with the desert blooming in unexpected colors after spring rains, Eleanor taught her last class before her lying-in period. She had arranged for a substitute teacher, a young woman from a neighboring town who had some education. Her students gave her drawings and small gifts, and several of the women cried as they hugged her goodbye. "We'll see you in a few months," Eleanor assured them. "I'm not abandoning the school, just taking time to have this baby." On May 20th, 2 weeks before her due date, Eleanor went into labor in the middle of the night. Mason, terrified but determined to be useful, rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch Mrs. Patterson and the midwife. By the time they arrived, Eleanor's contractions were coming hard and fast. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had read about childbirth, had heard stories from other women, but nothing truly prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was overwhelming, consuming her entire world. But Mason stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." At dawn, as the sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains, Eleanor gave birth to a son. The baby's first cries filled the little house, and Mason wept openly as the midwife placed the infant in Eleanor's arms. "He's perfect," Eleanor whispered, exhausted but euphoric. "Mason, look at him. He's perfect." Their son was indeed perfect, with a cap of dark hair, tiny fists that waved in the air, and gray eyes that would eventually change color but for now looked exactly like his father's. They named him Matthew Morris, and Mason held his son with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny face with an expression of such fierce love that Eleanor fell in love with him all over again. The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Eleanor recovered slowly, learning to navigate the demands of motherhood, while Mason threw himself into caring for both his wife and son. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Matthew when he cried, brought Eleanor food and water, and marveled constantly at the miracle of this new life they had created. By August, Eleanor was ready to return to teaching, though on a reduced schedule. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch Matthew during morning classes, bringing him to the schoolhouse at lunchtime so Eleanor could nurse him. The arrangement worked well, and Eleanor found herself loving the balance of teaching and motherhood, both roles fulfilling different needs in her life. Mason's partnership in the Double Creek Ranch was proving successful. The ranch had a good year, with healthy calves and favorable market prices. Tom Crawford was gradually stepping back, letting Mason take on more responsibility and decision-making. There was talk of expanding the operation, perhaps buying adjacent land that was coming available. Matthew thrived, growing plump and happy. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and his smile could light up a room. Mason was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, talking to him constantly even though the baby couldn't understand, reading to him from Eleanor's books. "I want him to hear words from the beginning," Mason explained. "I want language to be as natural to him as breathing." The seasons cycled through, bringing Eleanor's second winter in Sloan. The town had changed substantially in the year and a half since she had arrived. Literacy rates were climbing. More children attended school. Several adults could now read well enough to enjoy newspapers and books. The general store had started carrying a small selection of reading materials, responding to the new demand. Eleanor sometimes thought back to that first day, stepping off the stagecoach into dust and uncertainty, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She could never have imagined then where that decision would lead. to love and marriage, to a home in the desert, to a beautiful son, to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she had known in Boston. In December of 1883, Eleanor and Mason celebrated their first anniversary with a quiet dinner at home while Mrs. Patterson watched Matthew. They exchanged simple gifts. Eleanor gave Mason a new journal for his writing, which had become increasingly sophisticated and thoughtful. Mason gave Eleanor a beautiful shawl he had purchased from a traveling merchant, soft wool dyed in rich colors. 1 year, Eleanor said, marveling at how quickly the time had passed. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Best year of my life, Mason said simply. Every day with you and Matthew is a gift I never expected to receive. I love our life, Eleanor said. I love teaching, I love being a mother, I love this place, but most of all I love you. Mason reached across the table to take her hand. When I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to letting pride keep me from asking for help learning to read, it terrifies me. You changed everything for me, Eleanor. You gave me a future I never dared dream about. We gave each other a future, Eleanor corrected. I was running from a life I didn't want, searching for meaning and purpose. You helped me find both. Over the next few years, their life together deepened and grew. The ranch prospered under Mason's management, and in 1885, Tom Crawford made good on his promise to eventually retire, selling his remaining share of the operation to Mason and moving to town. At 28, Mason found himself the owner of a substantial ranch, a position he had never imagined attaining. Eleanor continued teaching, her school now an essential institution in Sloan. She had nearly 60 students, and she had trained 2 assistant teachers to help manage the growing numbers. Her evening literacy program had expanded to include not just women, but anyone who wanted to improve their reading and writing skills. The transformation she had hoped to inspire in Sloan had become reality. In the spring of 1886, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma. She was a tiny, delicate baby with her mother's brown eyes and a disposition that was equal parts sweet and stubborn. Matthew, now almost 4, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. The little house by the creek had grown too small for their expanding family, so Mason built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main living space. He did most of the work himself, with help from some of the ranch hands, and Eleanor marveled at the home he created. Solid and beautiful, crafted with love and care. Their third child, a son they named Michael, arrived in 1888, completing their family. By then, Mason was a respected figure in the community, known as a fair and honest rancher who treated his employees well and managed his land responsibly. Eleanor was beloved as the teacher who had brought education to Sloan, who had opened doors for a generation of children and adults alike. On summer evenings, after the children were in bed, Eleanor and Mason would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the desert mountains, talking about everything and nothing. These were Eleanor's favorite times, these quiet moments of connection with the man she loved, reflecting on the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked one such evening when they had been married 6 years. Leaving Boston, coming to this dusty little town, marrying a cowboy instead of a banker, Eleanor laughed, the question so absurd she barely knew how to answer. "Regret it? Mason, this life we've built is everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to hope for. I have meaningful work, a husband I love beyond measure, 3 beautiful children, and a community that has become my home. Why would I ever regret choosing this? Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me," Mason admitted. "A woman like you could have had anyone." "I didn't want anyone," Eleanor said firmly. I wanted you. I wanted the man who was brave enough to admit he needed help, dedicated enough to show up every day to learn, gentle enough to treat me with respect, and strong enough to build a life with me. I got exactly what I wanted. Mason pulled her close, kissing her temple. I love you, Eleanor Morris. Every single day I love you more. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch and school, by children growing and seasons changing. Matthew proved to be an avid reader like both his parents, devouring every book he could find. Emma was artistic, always drawing and creating. Michael was the adventurer, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. Mason taught all three to ride and work the ranch, while Eleanor ensured their education was thorough and comprehensive. In 1892, when Matthew was 10 and starting to think about his future, he asked his father about his early life. Mason, who had never hidden his past, told his son about growing up without parents, about learning to ranch as a child, about the years he spent unable to read. But then your mother came to town, Mason said, his voice warm with remembered emotion. And she changed everything. She taught me to read, but more than that, she taught me that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become more than you thought you could be. Is that why you always tell us education is important? Matthew asked. That's exactly why. Your mother gave me opportunities I never had before, opened up possibilities I didn't know existed. I want you and your sisters and brother to have every opportunity, every possibility. Education is the key to that. Matthew considered this seriously. I want to be a teacher like Mother when I grow up. I want to help people learn. Eleanor, overhearing this conversation from the kitchen, felt tears prick her eyes. Her son understood the value of what she did, wanted to carry on that tradition. It felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for. By 1895, Sloan had grown substantially. The railroad had come through, bringing new businesses and residents. The town now boasted several stores, 2 saloons, a proper hotel, a bank, and a church with a full-time minister. Eleanor's school had grown so large that the town had built a new, larger building, and Eleanor now oversaw 4 teachers in addition to her own classroom. Mason's ranch was one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and well-trained horses. He had never lost his love of learning, still reading voraciously and encouraging his children to do the same. He had even started writing articles about ranching techniques for agricultural journals, using the writing skills Eleanor had helped him develop all those years ago. On December 15, 1895, Eleanor and Mason celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. Their children were old enough now to understand the significance of the date, and they had planned a surprise party with help from Mrs. Patterson, who was still a close friend despite her advancing age. The celebration was held at the ranch, with friends and neighbors gathered to honor the couple. Tom Crawford, now in his 70s but still sharp, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 13 years ago, I watched a cowboy who couldn't read his own name marry a teacher from Boston, and I thought to myself, now that's either the best match I've ever seen or the worst. He paused for the laughter. Turns out it was the best. These two have built something remarkable together. A family, a successful ranch, a school that's transformed this town. They've shown us all what love and partnership really mean. Here's to Eleanor and Mason, and to many more years together. As people clinked glasses and offered congratulations, Eleanor looked around at the gathering, at her children, healthy and happy, at her husband, still as handsome and dear to her as the day they met, at the friends and community members who had become her family. This was everything she had left Boston to find: purpose, belonging, love. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Eleanor and Mason stood together in the doorway of their home, looking out at the star-filled sky. 13 years, Mason mused. Lucky number 13. Every year with you has been lucky, Eleanor said. Even the hard ones. What do you think the next 13 will bring? Mason asked. Eleanor considered the question. Matthew will probably leave for university in a few years. Emma isn't far behind, and Michael will keep us on our toes. The school will keep growing. The ranch will continue to thrive. We'll get older and hopefully wiser. More grandchildren eventually, Mason added with a grin. I'm going to be one of those grandfathers who teaches the little ones to read before they can walk. I have no doubt, Eleanor laughed. But whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, Mason agreed, wrapping his arms around her. That's the only way I want to face anything. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges, as all lives do. Matthew did indeed leave for university, studying to become a teacher like his mother. Emma showed such artistic talent that a visiting art dealer convinced Eleanor and Mason to send her to study in San Francisco. Michael, true to form, decided ranching was his calling and became Mason's right hand in managing the Double Creek Ranch. Eleanor continued teaching until 1900, when she was 41, having spent 18 years educating the children of Sloan and the surrounding area. When she finally retired, it was to focus on her role as grandmother, Matthew having married and presented them with twin daughters who needed their grandmother's attention and wisdom. Mason ran the ranch for another decade, before gradually turning operations over to Michael, who proved to be as capable and dedicated as his father. In their later years, Eleanor and Mason spent their days reading together, taking slow rides through the land they loved, and hosting family gatherings that filled their home with noise and laughter. In the summer of 1920, as they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the creek that ran past their house, Eleanor reflected on the incredible journey their life together had been. She was 61 now, Mason 63, and they had been married 38 years. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, but they had weathered them together, their love deepening with each passing year. You remember the first afternoon you came to the schoolhouse asking for lessons? Eleanor asked, a favorite memory she returned to often. I remember being terrified, Mason admitted. I thought you'd laugh at me, a grown man who couldn't read. Instead, you treated me with kindness and respect, like learning was the most natural thing in the world. It was natural for you. You took to it like you'd been waiting your whole life to learn. I had been waiting, Mason said quietly. I just didn't realize it until I met you. You didn't just teach me to read, Eleanor. You taught me that I was capable of more than I thought, that my lack of education didn't make me less. You saw me as I could be, not as I was. Eleanor reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. You were always remarkable, Mason. I just helped you see it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and orange. The children's laughter echoed across the land, Matthew's twin daughters now joined by Emma's son and Michael's 3 children. 7 grandchildren, each one a blessing, each one carrying forward the values Eleanor and Mason had worked so hard to instill. We did good, didn't we? Mason asked. With the children, with the ranch, with the life we built, we did better than good, Eleanor said firmly. We created something beautiful and lasting. Our children are educated and kind, following their own paths while holding on to what we taught them. This ranch is thriving and will continue to thrive under Michael's care. And the school I started, it's still operating, still changing lives. That's a legacy to be proud of. My only regret, Mason said slowly, is that I didn't learn to read earlier, so I could have had more years of lessons with you." Eleanor smiled, squeezing his hand. "You stayed after every lesson, even after you learned to read perfectly well. I think you got plenty of time with me." "Never enough," Mason said. "I could live 1,000 lifetimes and never get enough time with you." As twilight deepened into night and stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, Eleanor leaned her head on Mason's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. This man, this remarkable man who had walked into her schoolhouse 38 years ago unable to read his own name, had given her everything. Love and partnership, children and grandchildren, a home and a purpose. And she had given him something too, she knew. Not just the ability to read and write, though that had certainly mattered. She had given him her heart, her unwavering belief in his worth, a future he had never dared imagine. They had saved each other in their own ways and built something extraordinary together. The grandchildren were being called inside by their parents now, protesting the end of their play but ultimately complying. Lights came on in the windows of the various houses on the ranch property. Michael's family in the old main house that had been Tom Crawford's, Matthew's family in the guest house when they visited, Emma's family staying in town but coming out daily. "Should we go in?" Eleanor asked, though neither of them moved. "In a minute," Mason said. "I want to stay here a bit longer with you under these stars." So they stayed. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and love in the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert. The cowboy who couldn't read and the teacher from Boston, who had discovered in each other everything they had been searching for. Years later, when Eleanor was 68 and Mason was 70, they sat together in the same spot, surrounded by even more grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Double Creek Ranch had grown and prospered under Michael's management, becoming one of the most respected operations in Nevada. Matthew had become the superintendent of schools for the entire county, spreading his mother's passion for education across a broader area. Emma had become a renowned artist, her paintings of Western landscapes hanging in galleries across the country. But for Eleanor and Mason, the greatest success was simply this. They had loved each other well and truly through all the years of their marriage. They had remained each other's best friend, most trusted confidante, and deepest love. They had built a family that carried forward their values, a legacy that would outlast them both. On a warm evening in June of 1927, as the sun set on another day, Mason took Eleanor's hand and said the same thing he had said countless times over 45 years of marriage. "I love you, Eleanor Morris." And Eleanor, as she always did, replied, "I love you too, Mason Morris." Today, tomorrow, and always. They watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, surrounded by the sounds of family, the beauty of the land they loved, and the comfort of a love that had endured through all the challenges and triumphs of a life well lived together. The teacher and the cowboy, who had found in each other exactly what they needed, and had built from that foundation a life of extraordinary richness. When Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1929, at the age of 72, Eleanor mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given 47 years together, years filled with more love and joy than many people experience in twice that time. She lived another 5 years, dying in 1934 at the age of 75, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The legacy they left was profound. The Double Creek Ranch continued to operate successfully for generations. The school Eleanor had started in Sloan had grown into a comprehensive educational system that served the entire region. Dozens of people could trace their literacy to Eleanor's teaching, either directly or through the teachers she had trained. and their descendants carried forward their story, telling new generations about the teacher from Boston who came to a town that couldn't read, and the cowboy who stayed after every lesson, and the extraordinary love they built together. In the end, Eleanor and Mason were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful. Eleanor's read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher, she changed lives through love and learning." Mason's read, "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, and rancher, he never stopped learning." But perhaps the most fitting memorial was something neither of them ever saw: a library built in Sloan in 1936, funded by their children and named in their honor. The Morris Memorial Library stood as a testament to their belief in the power of education, housing thousands of books that would educate and inspire future generations. And in that library, preserved under glass in a place of honor, sat two items: a worn copy of Walt Whitman's poems, the same book Eleanor had given Mason during one of his early lessons, and a small slate with chalk marks still faintly visible, showing the letters of the alphabet that Mason had painstakingly learned 38 years before. These simple objects told the story of how a teacher and a student had become partners, then lovers, then spouses who built a life of extraordinary depth and meaning. They spoke of second chances and new beginnings, of courage and dedication, of love that transforms and endures. The story of Eleanor and Mason Morris became legend in Sloan, Nevada, passed down through generations as an example of what love and partnership could achieve. They had started with nothing but dedication and mutual respect, and from that foundation, they had built something magnificent: a family, a legacy, and a love story that would inspire others for decades to come. And somewhere, in the vast desert night under the brilliant Nevada stars, their spirits perhaps still lingered together. The teacher and her cowboy, still learning, still loving, still partners in all things, just as they had promised each other so many years ago on a December day in 1882. When a Boston teacher and a Nevada ranch hand had stood before their community and vowed to love each other for all their days. They had kept that promise beautifully and completely, creating a story that proved love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, and build something lasting and true. The schoolteacher who arrived in a town that couldn't read, and the cowboy who stayed after every lesson, had found in each other not just romance, but purpose, partnership, and a love that would echo through time, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of education, dedication, and above all, love.